Ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand something fundamental. Every man has weaknesses. Some of these weaknesses are subtle, nearly invisible, buried under layers of confidence and ambition. Others are glaring, disruptive forces that shape a man's relationships, his career, and his entire sense of self. But the truth is, most men don't even recognize their own weaknesses. They mask them with bravado, with distractions, with an unrelenting need to appear strong at all costs. But here's where it gets really interesting. Women often see these weaknesses before men do. And that knowledge, that awareness, it's a kind of power, a responsibility. Because when you understand the flaws and vulnerabilities that shape a man's behavior, you gain the ability to navigate relationships with wisdom, strength, and clarity. You no longer take things personally. You no longer feel confused by his inconsistencies. Instead, you see what's really happening beneath the surface. There's a deeply ingrained notion in our society that men must be strong always. Strength, in this sense, is not just about physicality or leadership. It extends to emotional resilience, to an ability to withstand suffering without flinching, without showing signs of distress. And in many ways, this expectation has forged men who can endure great hardship, who can take on responsibility and carry burdens that would break a weaker individual. But there's a downside to this conditioning, one that often goes unnoticed until it has already taken its toll: the systematic repression of emotion. From a young age, men are told, sometimes subtly, sometimes explicitly, that vulnerability is weakness. They are encouraged to toughen up, to shake off pain, to man up in the face of struggle. And what does this do over time? It creates a barrier, an impenetrable wall between what they feel and what they allow themselves to express. The problem is that emotions don't simply disappear because they're ignored. They linger, they build, they fester. And when a man does not learn how to process his emotions in a healthy way, he becomes a prisoner of his own suppression. This is why so many men struggle with emotional intimacy. It is not because they do not care, not because they do not feel deeply, but because they have never been taught how to translate those feelings into words, into actions that express love and connection. Instead, they default to silence, to avoidance, to behaviors that seem cold or distant, but are in reality symptoms of something much deeper: a learned inability to articulate inner turmoil. And so they push emotions down, hoping that by ignoring them, they will eventually disappear. But emotions do not work that way. They manifest in different forms: anger, frustration, withdrawal, even physical ailments. And when a man cannot recognize the root of his own suffering, he is bound to repeat destructive patterns in his relationships, in his career, in his own sense of self-worth. The most tragic part of this cycle is that many men do not even realize they are caught in it. They believe they are doing the right thing by keeping it together, by not burdening others with their problems. They see emotional suppression as a virtue, as a sign of control and strength. But real strength, true unshakable strength, is not found in the denial of emotion, but in the mastery of it. It is the ability to confront one's fears, to understand the depths of one's own suffering, and to integrate that understanding into a life that is meaningful and authentic. And here's the crucial part: a man who does not understand his own emotions cannot possibly understand the emotions of another. This is why so many women in relationships feel unseen, unheard, emotionally abandoned, not because their partners do not care, but because they simply do not know how to engage on that level. They were never taught. They were never given the tools to navigate their own inner world, let alone someone else's. And so they retreat into familiar patterns: stoicism, avoidance, detachment. This creates an unfortunate paradox. Women, by nature, seek emotional depth in relationships, a level of connection that goes beyond surface-level interactions. But many men, due to years of conditioning, are unable to meet them there, not because they do not want to, but because they do not know how. And when confronted with the expectation of emotional availability, they often shut down further, reinforcing the very cycle that prevents deep and meaningful relationships from forming in the first place. But this cycle is not unbreakable. The key lies in awareness and understanding. It lies in recognizing that emotional repression is not a sign of strength, but a learned behavior that can and must be unlearned if one hopes to live a full and meaningful life. It requires the willingness to confront discomfort, to face the parts of oneself that have been buried for too long. And most importantly, it requires the courage to be vulnerable, to admit what is difficult to admit, to speak what has remained unspoken. This is not just about relationships, it is about self-awareness. It is about the ability to engage with the world in a way that is not limited by fear or insecurity. It is about reclaiming the parts of oneself that have been neglected, about building a foundation of strength that is rooted not in denial but in truth. And the truth is that no one, not men, not women, can truly thrive if they are constantly at war with their own emotions. For those who recognize this reality, there is an opportunity to change, to break free from the cycle of repression and avoidance, to learn what it means to express oneself fully, to engage with the world in a way that is authentic and whole. And for the women who seek to understand this about the men in their lives, there is also an opportunity to offer patience, to encourage growth, but also to recognize when someone is unwilling or unable to change. Because emotional suppression, if left unchecked, does not just harm the individual experiencing it. It affects everyone around them. It shapes relationships, families, entire communities. So the question is, will you choose to see this for what it is? Will you choose to understand, to recognize the signs, to navigate these challenges with wisdom and strength? Because awareness is the first step toward change, and change, if one is willing to embrace it, is the foundation of something far greater than what came before. There's a fundamental reality that few people are willing to confront. Most men live under an enormous weight of expectations, pressures, and silent struggles. And these struggles, for the most part, are unseen. They're internal battles, wars fought behind closed doors, conflicts that rarely make it to the surface because acknowledging them feels like admitting defeat. There's an immense loneliness in this experience. A man is expected to perform, to provide, to stand unwavering in the face of adversity. He is expected to be strong, but not just in the traditional sense. He must be emotionally unshakable, mentally resilient, physically capable. And yet, beneath this carefully constructed exterior, there exists a quiet vulnerability, a fear of inadequacy, of failure, of being seen as weak. One of the greatest weaknesses that men carry is the inability to ask for help. It is ingrained, deeply embedded into the psyche from an early age. Society rewards independence, self-reliance, and stoicism. It teaches that strength means handling things alone, that admitting struggle is a sign of failure, and that needing support is somehow a flaw rather than a fundamental part of human existence. This creates a paradox. The very thing that could help a man become stronger, seeking guidance, learning from others, accepting assistance, is perceived as the thing that would make him weak. And so, he isolates himself. He convinces himself that no one would understand, that the burden he carries is his alone, and he suffers in silence. The consequences of this mindset are devastating. A man who refuses to ask for help will inevitably reach a breaking point. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but eventually. No one can carry the weight of the world indefinitely without faltering. And when that breaking point comes, it does not manifest in a healthy, constructive way. It surfaces in frustration, in anger, in withdrawal. It seeps into relationships, into careers, into every aspect of life. It creates distance between a man and those who care about him because he does not know how to express his pain, how to communicate his struggles, how to let someone in. He has spent years building walls, and now he finds himself trapped behind them. This is why so many relationships suffer, not because men do not feel, but because they do not express what they feel. It's not that they don't care, it's that they don't know how to articulate their struggles without feeling as though they are exposing themselves to judgment. The tragedy is that the very people who could offer support, partners, friends, family, are kept at arm's length, left wondering why he seems distant, why he shuts down, why he refuses to open up, even when it is clear that he is suffering. And this breeds resentment. It creates an emotional gap that, over time, becomes impossible to bridge. A man who cannot ask for help cannot grow. He cannot evolve. He cannot break free from the patterns that keep him trapped in cycles of stress, self-doubt, and quiet suffering. Growth requires humility. It requires the recognition that no one, not even the strongest, most capable, most independent man, is immune to struggle. It requires the courage to admit, I don't have all the answers, I need guidance, I need support. And that is not weakness, that is wisdom. But this wisdom is rare. It is uncomfortable. It goes against years, sometimes decades of conditioning. It forces a man to confront the reality that he is not invincible, that he is not above struggle, that he is, in fact, human. And for many men, that realization is terrifying. Because if they are not the unbreakable pillar they were taught to be, then what are they? If they allow themselves to be vulnerable, will they still be respected? Will they still be seen as strong? The answer is yes, but not in the way they have been led to believe. True respect, true strength, true resilience does not come from denial. It does not come from pretending that everything is fine when it isn't. It comes from self-awareness, from the willingness to face reality head-on, from the ability to admit what is difficult to admit. And the men who understand this, who break free from the illusion that they must do everything alone, are the ones who become truly formidable. They are the ones who cultivate real confidence, not the fragile, performative kind that crumbles under pressure, but the kind that is rooted in self-knowledge and adaptability. They are the ones who build stronger relationships, who inspire trust, who create meaningful connections, because they are not afraid to engage with life fully, to share their experiences, to accept that they are a work in progress. And this, ultimately, is what every man must come to terms with. No one succeeds alone. No one carries the full weight of existence without support. The refusal to ask for help is not strength, it is self-sabotage. And the longer this illusion is maintained, the more damage it does not just to the individual, but to everyone around him. So the question becomes, will you continue to hold on to this idea, this notion that suffering in silence is somehow noble? Or will you recognize that real strength is found in the ability to grow, to learn, to ask for what you need? Because the men who understand this truth, who embrace it rather than resist it, are the ones who rise above the rest. And that choice, that responsibility lies in your hands. There is something deeply unsettling about watching a man struggle with his own sense of identity and worth, particularly when he doesn't even realize that he is trapped in a cycle of self-sabotage. One of the greatest weaknesses that holds men back, whether they recognize it or not, is the inability to control their emotions. This does not mean that men should suppress or ignore what they feel, quite the opposite. It means that when a man allows his emotions to dictate his decisions, to cloud his judgment, or to control his interactions with others, he is no longer in charge of his own destiny. He becomes reactive rather than proactive, a puppet rather than a master of his own fate. It is a strange paradox. Men are often taught that emotions are a sign of weakness, that showing vulnerability will be used against them, that the world will punish them for revealing too much. And yet, when emotions are not understood and controlled, they wreak havoc in the background. They dictate behavior in ways that are not immediately obvious. The man who lashes out in anger, the man who withdraws in silence, the man who allows resentment to build until it poisons everything around him, these are all symptoms of emotional immaturity, not strength. A man who cannot control his emotions is a man who will eventually destroy everything he builds, whether it be his career, his relationships, or his own sense of purpose. It happens in small ways at first. He finds himself frustrated over things that should not bother him. A simple disagreement turns into an argument that escalates beyond reason. A minor setback sends him into a spiral of doubt and self-criticism. He reacts without thinking, says things he later regrets, makes choices based on impulse rather than principle. And with every unchecked emotional reaction, he loses a little more control, a little more respect from others, but more importantly, from himself. The truth is, people do not respect a man who is at the mercy of his emotions. They may fear him, they may pity him, they may even tolerate him for a time, but they do not look to him as a leader. They do not trust him with responsibility. They do not see him as someone who can be relied upon in moments of crisis. Because deep down, everyone understands that a man who cannot control himself cannot be trusted to control anything else. There is no greater test of character than how a man behaves when he is under pressure. When things do not go his way, when he is criticized, when he faces failure, these moments reveal his true nature. Does he crumble? Does he lash out? Does he retreat into bitterness and blame others for his misfortunes? Or does he stand firm, process the emotions without allowing them to dictate his actions, and respond with clarity and purpose? That is the difference between a man who is respected and a man who is tolerated. But controlling emotions does not mean suppressing them. That is another mistake many make. It is not about pretending that pain does not exist, that frustration is not real, that sadness does not creep in. It is about understanding where those emotions come from, acknowledging them, and deciding consciously, deliberately what to do with them. That is power. That is discipline. And that is what separates the men who rise above their circumstances from those who are consumed by them. Think about the people who command the most respect. They are not the ones who are emotionally erratic, who are easily provoked, who wear their insecurities on their sleeves. They are the ones who, no matter what is happening around them, remain composed. They speak with intention. They listen before they react. They do not allow temporary emotions to dictate permanent decisions. And because of that, they become the ones others turn to in times of uncertainty. They become the ones who lead, who inspire, who shape the world rather than being shaped by it. And this is not something that happens by accident. It takes effort. It takes awareness. It requires a man to look inward and ask himself difficult questions. What triggers my emotions? Why do I react the way I do? What patterns have I developed that keep me stuck in the same destructive cycles? And most importantly, am I willing to do the work to change? Because that is what it comes down to: work. It is not enough to recognize the problem. Recognition without action is useless. The only way to gain control over one's emotions is through discipline, through conscious effort, through the willingness to face discomfort rather than running from it. It means learning to pause before reacting, to process before responding, to make decisions based on principles rather than fleeting feelings. The world will not make this easy. There will always be temptations to give in to emotion, to react impulsively, to allow frustration or anger or pride to take the wheel. There will be people who provoke, situations that challenge, failures that sting. But the man who remains composed in the face of chaos, who does not allow outside forces to dictate his internal state, he is the one who commands respect. He is the one who becomes unshakable. This is not about suppressing who you are. It is about refining who you are. It is about taking the raw material of your emotions and forging them into something stronger. Because emotions, when properly understood and controlled, are not weaknesses. They are sources of immense power. The key is learning how to harness them, how to direct them with purpose, how to ensure that they serve you rather than control you. And when that happens, everything changes, relationships improve, decisions become clearer. Confidence is no longer something that needs to be performed. It becomes something that is simply there, unshaken by circumstance and depicted by the opinions of others. This is what true strength looks like, not the loud, aggressive, volatile kind that demands attention, but the quiet, steady, resolute kind that commands respect. And that is the kind of strength that cannot be faked, cannot be taken away, and cannot be ignored. There is something deeply revealing about how a man handles responsibility. It is not just a reflection of his competence, but a fundamental test of his character. Responsibility is what shapes a man, molds him into something capable of carrying weight, of standing firm in the face of adversity. And yet so many run from it. They shrink back, avoid commitments, sidestep accountability, and justify it under the guise of freedom. But real freedom does not come from avoiding responsibility. It comes from embracing it fully, from carrying the burdens that are necessary to forge strength and discipline. A man who avoids responsibility is not free. He is a slave to his fears, to his impulses, to his own inability to confront what is necessary for growth. He drifts through life making excuses, waiting for things to improve without ever taking decisive action. And in doing so, he weakens himself, because responsibility is not just an obligation, it is an opportunity. It is an opportunity to prove something, not just to the world, but to himself. To prove that he is capable, that he can carry the load, that he is someone others can rely on. And that is a foundation upon which respect is built. Respect does not come from words. It does not come from appearance. It does not come from temporary success or fleeting moments of dominance. It comes from a pattern of behavior, from consistency, from demonstrating again and again that when things become difficult, when the pressure is on, when it would be easy to walk away, he does not. He stands, he faces it. He takes responsibility even when it would be easier not to. And people see that. They recognize it. They respect it because it is rare, because it is difficult, because it speaks to something fundamental about what it means to be strong. The weakness that plagues so many men today is not physical, nor is it intellectual. It is the inability to commit to something and see it through. It is the habit of abandoning ship when things do not go as planned. It is the refusal to take ownership over one's circumstances and instead blame others, blame society, blame anything except the man in the mirror. And that is a tragedy because it guarantees stagnation. No progress can be made, no meaningful change can occur when a man refuses to take control over his own life. This is why responsibility is so critical, because it is through responsibility that a man gains the ability to shape his world rather than being shaped by it. It is through responsibility that he develops competence, that he earns the trust of others, that he builds something that lasts. And it is through responsibility that he ultimately gains control over his emotions, control over his actions, control over his destiny. But taking responsibility is not easy. It requires sacrifice. It requires discipline. It requires a willingness to endure discomfort in the service of something greater. That is why so many avoid it. They look for shortcuts. They search for ways to achieve success without effort, to gain admiration without earning it, to reap rewards without putting in the work. But that is not how the world functions. That is not how respect is earned. Respect is built in the trenches, in the moments when no one is watching, in the decisions that demand perseverance and integrity. And here is the paradox. The more responsibility a man takes on, the stronger he becomes. The greater the burden, the greater the growth. A man who chooses to carry responsibility willingly, who does not flinch in the face of challenge, who does not crumble when things become difficult, he becomes something formidable. He becomes someone who cannot be ignored, someone who commands attention not because he demands it, but because his actions speak for themselves. That is what leadership is. That is what strength is. It is not about dominance or control over others. It is about self-mastery, about proving through action that one is capable of bearing the weight of reality. And when that happens, everything changes. People respond to it. They recognize it instinctively. They trust it. They respect it. They follow it. And that respect is not given lightly. It is not something that can be demanded. It is not something that can be faked. It must be earned. And the only way to earn it is through responsibility, through taking ownership over one's life, over one's choices, over one's failures and successes alike. Because the man who does that, who refuses to make excuses, who refuses to shirk his duties, who refuses to let fear dictate his actions, he is the man who commands respect. Not because he seeks it, but because he embodies it. This is the challenge. This is the test. Will you take responsibility or will you run from it? Will you carry the weight or will you let it crush you? Because the truth is, there is no neutral ground. Either you choose to shape your life or life shapes you. Either you take control or you are controlled. And the difference between those two paths is responsibility. It is the willingness to stand up, to face what needs to be faced, to do what must be done, even when it is difficult, even when it is uncomfortable, even when no one else would blame you for walking away. That is what separates those who are truly strong from those who are merely pretending. And that is the decision every man must make. Will you rise to meet it? There is something profoundly unsettling about a person who refuses to confront their own shortcomings. It is not just a matter of self-deception. It is a refusal to engage with reality itself. And reality has a way of imposing itself upon you, whether you acknowledge it or not. You see, strength is not just a matter of force or willpower. It is fundamentally about the ability to confront the truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. And yet so many people avoid this responsibility. They blame others. They shift the burden. They construct elaborate justifications for their failures rather than simply admitting, I am not where I want to be, and that is my fault. But there is something liberating about taking ownership over your own existence. There is something transformative about looking at the chaos in your life and deciding that despite everything, you are going to put it in order. That is no easy task. It requires an honest evaluation of who you are, where you have fallen short of where you have allowed weakness to take root. And weakness does take root. It festers. It grows in the dark corners of your mind, in the habits you refuse to break, in the compromises you make with yourself when no one else is watching. This is why accountability is so critical. Not just accountability to others, but accountability to yourself. Because if you cannot trust yourself, if you cannot rely on your own discipline, your own principles, then you will always be at the mercy of external circumstances. You will drift through life unanchored, easily swayed by the expectations of others, incapable of standing firm when it truly matters. That is not a path to strength. It is a path to resentment, to bitterness, to the slow erosion of self-respect. And self-respect matters. It matters more than people are willing to admit, because it is the foundation upon which everything else is built. A person who does not respect themselves will never truly be respected by others. They might be liked, they might be tolerated, they might even be admired in a superficial way. But deep down, people recognize authenticity. They recognize when someone has paid the price for their strength, when someone has confronted their demons rather than running from them. And that recognition earned, not demanded, is the foundation of genuine respect. So how does one build this? How does one develop a core that is unshakable, that does not crumble under pressure, that does not bend at the first sign of hardship? The answer is simple, but not easy. You do what is difficult. You do what is necessary. You do what you know deep down you have been avoiding, and you do it consistently with discipline, with focus, with an unrelenting commitment to improvement. There is a reason people admire those who endure suffering and emerge stronger. It is because we all know instinctively that life is suffering, that hardship is inevitable, that pain is part of existence. And if you are unwilling to confront that, if you are unwilling to prepare for it, then you will be broken by it when it arrives. But if you choose instead to willingly shoulder the burden to carry your cross, so to speak, then you become someone truly formidable. Not just someone who can endure suffering, but someone who can transform it into something meaningful. That is the difference between those who are weak and those who are strong. It is not about external power. It is not about dominance. It is about the ability to suffer well, to face hardship with dignity, to remain unbroken even when everything around you seems to be falling apart. That is a rare quality. It is a quality that commands respect, not because it is forced, but because it is undeniable. And it starts with the smallest decisions. It starts with whether or not you get up when the alarm clock rings. It starts with whether or not you follow through on the commitments you make to yourself. It starts with whether or not you tell the truth, even when a lie would be more convenient. These are the battles that determine the trajectory of a life. Win them, and you build a foundation of strength that cannot be shaken. Lose them, and you will find yourself constantly at the mercy of forces beyond your control. But here is the paradox. The more responsibility you take on, the stronger you become. The more burdens you willingly carry, the less burdened you feel. Because there's something about purpose, real, meaningful purpose, that lifts you above suffering, that gives you the strength to endure, that allows you to stand tall even in the face of overwhelming adversity. And that is what people respect. Not wealth, not status, not superficial charm, but the ability to suffer with dignity, to carry responsibility without complaint, to remain steady when others falter. So ask yourself, are you carrying your load? Are you taking ownership of your life? Or are you blaming others for your circumstances? Because if you are not taking responsibility, if you are not actively working to improve, if you are not confronting the hard truths that you know deep down you need to confront, then you are choosing weakness. And weakness does not inspire respect. It inspires pity at best and contempt at worst. But you do not have to remain weak. You do not have to continue making excuses. You can decide right now to start carrying the weight that is yours to carry. You can decide to put your life in order. You can decide to become someone who commands respect, not because you demand it, but because you embody it. That is the path forward. That is the challenge. The only question is, will you rise to meet it? There is a crucial truth that many people refuse to acknowledge: the world does not care about your feelings. Reality is indifferent to your suffering. It does not bend itself to accommodate your insecurities, nor does it rearrange itself to ensure your comfort. This is a hard pill to swallow, but it is necessary. Because if you continue to believe that the world should change to fit your desires, rather than the other way around, you will live a life of constant disappointment, frustration, and resentment. The mature approach, the approach that leads to competence, respect, and genuine strength, is to recognize that it is your responsibility to adapt to reality, not the other way around. And that means learning to navigate hardship without falling apart. It means developing the psychological resilience necessary to withstand suffering, rather than expecting life to be free of it. Because suffering is inevitable. There is no escaping it. The question is not whether or not you will suffer, but whether or not you will suffer well. Whether or not you will allow that suffering to refine you, or whether you will allow it to break you. People who command respect are not those who have had an easy life. They are those who have been tested by hardship and have emerged stronger because of it. They are those who have faced failure, rejection, and disappointment, yet have refused to be defeated by them. They are those who have chosen to carry their burdens rather than complain about them. That is what people admire. That is what inspires others. And yet, so many people live their lives in avoidance of difficulty. They run from responsibility. They make excuses. They tell themselves that the reason they are not where they want to be is because of external circumstances rather than their own choices. But that kind of thinking leads only to weakness. Because if you believe that your problems are always someone else's fault, then you have given away your power. You have decided that you are helpless, that you have no agency, that you are merely a victim of forces beyond your control. And that is the surest way to ensure that your life never improves. But there is another way. There is a way to break free from this self-imposed prison. And it starts with one simple decision: the decision to take ownership of your life. The decision to stop blaming, stop complaining, stop making excuses, and instead focus on what you can control. And there is always something you can control. You may not be able to change every external circumstance, but you can always change how you respond to them. You can always decide to act with integrity, with discipline, with courage. And that is the difference between those who are respected and those who are not. It is not about wealth. It is not about power. It is about character. It is about being someone who can be relied upon, someone who does what they say they will do, someone who stands firm even when the ground beneath them is shaking. Because life will test you. It will throw obstacles in your path. It will challenge you in ways you never expected. And if you are not prepared for that, if you have not built the internal fortitude necessary to withstand those challenges, then you will crumble under pressure. But if you are willing to take responsibility, if you are willing to put in the effort to discipline yourself, to develop the skills necessary to navigate the difficulties of life, then you become someone who is truly formidable. Someone who is not easily shaken. Someone who commands respect, not because they demand it, but because they have earned it. That is the kind of person people look up to. Not the one who complains about their circumstances, but the one who rises above them. Not the one who blames others for their failures, but the one who learns from them. Not the one who expects life to be easy, but the one who embraces the challenge. And make no mistake, it is a challenge. It is not easy to take responsibility. It is not easy to admit that your life is a reflection of your own choices. It is much easier to point fingers, to play the victim, to insist that if only things were different, then you would be successful, happy, fulfilled. But that kind of thinking leads nowhere. It is a dead end. Because even if your external circumstances were to change, the underlying issue would remain. You have not yet developed the character necessary to handle life's challenges. And that is what must change. That is what must be addressed, not the world, but you. Because the world will always be unfair. It will always be unpredictable. It will always be full of challenges. And the only way to thrive in such a world is to become the kind of person who can handle it. So ask yourself, are you taking responsibility for your life? Are you doing everything in your power to improve, to grow, to become stronger? Or are you making excuses? Are you avoiding the hard truths that you know deep down you need to face? Because that is the real test. That is what determines whether or not you will be someone who is respected, someone who is admired, someone who is truly capable of making a difference. And it all starts with a choice. The choice to stop running from difficulty and start embracing it. The choice to stop expecting life to be easy and start preparing for its challenges. The choice to become someone who does not crumble under pressure but rises above it. That is what separates those who are respected from those who are ignored. And it is a choice that is available to you right now if you are willing to take it. Respect is not something you demand, it is something you earn. It comes from the way you carry yourself, the way you handle adversity, and the way you take responsibility for your own life. The world does not reward excuses or self-pity, it rewards strength, discipline, and integrity. If you want people to respect you, you must first respect yourself. That means holding yourself to a higher standard, facing challenges head on, and becoming someone who is reliable, competent, and courageous. The path is not easy, but it is the only one worth walking.